I'm Paul Kelly. I work as a medical illustrator, surgical animator, and a videographer at TVASurg. And we've been making videos for over 10 years now that combine 3D animation with live footage from the OR. And we've used several different tools over the years to accomplish this. Recently, we've reached a point where we do almost all of our video editing in the free software DaVinci Resolve by Blackmagic. And we've also begun to utilize its 3D animation features. So what I want to do today is show you how I used DaVinci Resolve for animation using a node-based compositing part of the software, Fusion. What I want to focus on in this webinar is the light version of Fusion that is built into DaVinci Resolve, which is available for free, and show how its capabilities are comparable with After Effects. I mean, this is a legit alternative to After Effects in a freeware, which I think is amazing. And I'm going to show you how this tool can be used to build shots for animation using 3D renders, and then also show some of the 2D animation capabilities as well. Now, building node structures might be something that's new to you, or you might be familiar with this. A lot of shaders for GPU renderers use nodes. But either way, I think you're going to come to enjoy this. I found it kind of intuitive after a while, so I think everyone will be able to get on board and understand how it works. Now, I'm going to guess that a good chunk of the people in attendance are familiar with After Effects, because that's kind of the industry standard when it comes to compositing. So I'm going to start off with an example of a shot from a recent video and show you how I built that in AE first. Then we'll jump over to Fusion and I'll show you how to build it there. So basically, in a recent video release, this one right here, I'm going to show you the opening shot for this case. What we wanted to do was sort of set the stage for the story and explain why this procedure was necessary. Basically, the patient had a very large tumor, a sarcoma, inside their vena cava. And that's kind of the whole reason. So this tumor is congesting the liver, it's restricting blood flow, and it's creeping into the right atrium of the heart, which is really bad. So we wanted to highlight this. And in this opening shot, I have multiple layers of transparency happening at the same time. I want the liver to be transparent so that I can show that vena cava and behind it. And then I want the vena cava to be transparent so that I can show the tumor inside of it. So this is what the final shot kind of looks like. The circle extended from the renal vein cable column. Yeah, so this right here, this point, and I actually think later I showed this a little bit better, but basically getting this label onto this part of the tumor that's creeping up into the heart, that was the important thing that I wanted to show. So let's start off in After Effects. So basically inside of After Effects, got my main comp, and if I kind of go back a little bit here, we have multiple pre-comps sort of all working together. So when I bring in the original render passes as an EXR render sequence, I'm going to drop those into a comp, and then inside of those comps is where I do the render pass compositing. I might add some ambient occlusion. I might add some extra reflections. Personally, I like to do my depth blurs inside of these comps. So also, if I have like a matte or an alpha channel, I'll do that in the shot comp. And then I'm going to take all those render passes once they're I've set up my layers, and then I'm going to make a comp that combines all the separate elements or takes into one master shot, which in this case, I have 3 different takes, all serving the same purpose, which will eventually be used as one shot, which is the shot of the liver showing the tumor inside of it with those multiple layers of transparency. And so in order to do that, I used some masks on these layers. And so the masks had to have some keyframes associated with them. And so as I scroll through here, you see that the masks were being keyframed, essentially rotoscoped the masks, so that I could have those go along with the animation. And so at points in my Cinema 4D camera, in the 3D scene where there was some easing in and out on the camera animation, I've also eased those keyframes in After Effects so that the animation matches up. And then once all those keyframes for the masks were set up, pre-comp to this again, and then that's where I added in the freeze frames for the pacing. So this is the final level comp, and this is where we would add labels and narration. So that's basically the structure of the After Effects comp, and I'm hoping that most people kind of followed along with how that was built. So I hope that kind of gives an idea of the challenge. And I actually built this in After Effects first, just to kind of wrap my head around what did I need to accomplish. So I had, you know, three takes of the same shot, and I had to add some masks to them and then layer them up. So that's basically what I did here. So now I think we can close out After Effects and we'll jump over to DaVinci Resolve. And when you open up DaVinci Resolve, you're going to be greeted with this window at the beginning. And this is the project manager. DaVinci Resolve works a little bit different than other software you're probably familiar with, like the Adobe software where you open up a file. You can have files with DaVinci Resolve, but mostly it kind of works through this project manager window. It has all your projects here, and it's all stored on a local database. So I'm going to go into the webinar project, which I've already got set up.
When collaborating on a project, you might have a .drp
DaVinci Resolve project file. And so if you wanted to open that, you would go down here to import. You would go in and you'd find that file, and then we'd open it up. All right. So here we are inside of DaVinci Resolve, and there's several different components to this software. All along the bottom here, we have these different icons, and these are different like workspaces. The one on the far left is the media page. So this is when we would, or where we would import our assets. And if we were starting a project from scratch, or if you had some assets like footage, you know, you'd bring them in here. And this is kind of like your little Adobe Bridge sort of like component of DaVinci Resolve. It helps you organize all your assets. I'm going to navigate a little bit over here along the page, the bottom of the UI. You see we've got a cut page, an edit page, a fusion, which is where we're going to be focused today. There's also the color corrections, the Fairlight audio editing, and then at the very end, we have deliver. That's where we export our final project. So I'm going to go into edit. And if you've got those assets, probably you're going to see a bunch of red media missing, you know, messages on each of these clips. So in order to link up those clips, there is an easy way to do that. In the upper left-hand side here, we have a relink media button, and that will probably be red for you if you've downloaded these assets and it can't find the path of where those assets are on your local machine. So if you click that red icon, that little chain link icon, you're going to be able to relink that media. Let's get right into to doing some of the compositing. So the way I've set up this first set of tracks, we have ourselves a timeline here, and timelines in DaVinci Resolve are sort of like your master comp, but I think a more accurate analogy is more of like a sequence in Premiere Pro, because Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve are both intended for video, and they behave a little bit more similarly than After Effects, but I can show you some parallel workflows. So one thing that you'll notice is that when I have two clips on the same track, is I can have them right up against one another. Whereas in After Effects, every time I make a cut, it goes up to the next layer up. And that means I have to scroll up and down constantly. And so when you've got a lot of cuts and a lot of clips in a comp, in After Effects, you've got to scroll up and down through this huge, you know, array of all these clips. And sometimes the order of them gets a little, you know, mixed up. They're not perfectly cascading. But in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere, you can have each of those clips line up exactly on the same line with each one. And so that's one of the advantages of working in this way is it's a little bit cleaner. But I'm actually going to show you, and this gets even more concise and efficient as we get more into the capabilities of DaVinci Resolve. But for right now, I've set up this comp, the first one, caval sarcoma. I've set this up to sort of mimic the way we do this in After Effects. So the top track is the liver, the middle one is the vena cava, and then the very bottom is the tumor. And now I want to go into Fusion and I want to start looking at the nodes that are associated with each of these clips. But before I do that, I need to point out one of the sort of quirks of working in DaVinci Resolve, which is that when you have layered tracks like this, you go into Fusion, it's going to show you the nodes associated with whichever is the topmost track being active. So if I want to see the nodes associated with the bottom track, I have to deactivate the top two tracks. And I'm going to just disable those by clicking on this little film strip icon. And I believe the shortcut for that is Control Shift and the number of that track. Yeah. So if you're on PC, it's Control Shift and whichever number the track is, you hit that and it'll toggle it on and off. I'm not totally sure what the Mac equivalent shortcut is, but I think you swap out Command for Control there. But at any rate, if we turn off these top two tracks, we've got the bottom track for the tumor here. And I'm also going with the clips that are on the right side. The ones that are on the left are JPEG. The ones that are on the right are PNG. So we've got our transparency already taken care of for us for the background. So let's go down here to the bottom. We're going to click on this little magic wand icon to take us into the Fusion page. And this will show us the nodes that are associated with making this happen. So in every clip on your timeline in DaVinci Resolve, you're always going to have a media in and a media out node. So even if you've brought in a clip and you've done nothing in Fusion, if you look at that clip in Fusion, there always will be a media in and media out node. So the media in is basically referencing where that media is coming from. And here I've just shown that that's the name, that's the default name. But for organization's sake, I like to rename those medias because as we get into more compositing, I'll show you, you're actually going to be bringing in multiple pieces of media. So I'll rename those. And the way that you do that is with F2. And then that allows you to rename a node. So here, this originally had said media 1. We don't need this anymore because that was just to sort of explain what's happening here. This used to be called media 1. Now it's called tumor. So I've called it tumor. And originally, it looked like this. The way I brought that up was I just hit the number 1. Now, you notice we've got 2 viewports up here at the top. And these correlate to the 2 little dots underneath each node. We've got a dot on the left for this viewer and a dot on the right for this viewer. So these are not necessarily earlier and later stages of the node tree, but they can be assigned to any node in your node tree. You can just give it one of these viewports. So for right now, I'm just showing the original source, which is that PNG of the tumor. And if I click back in to the start of the timeline here, you can see that animation taking place. And so it's already got the transparent background. Sweet. So I want to add a custom background. TVASurg, we use this sort of gray gradient, and we can build that here with a background node. So now I'm going to hit I'm going to grab the background node. I'm going to hit number 1 on my keyboard, and that's going to bring up this gradient. And so I've gone into the attributes of that node, which are in the inspector on the right-hand side here. You can toggle that on and off using this. And the inspector is where we find all the attributes. So we can change the position, we can change the, we'll have a lot more options with different nodes, but basically for just a simple background node, a background node is essentially the same thing as a solid in After Effects, but it has some capabilities built into it. In After Effects, if you wanted to put a gradient onto a solid, you'd have to drop an effect onto it, whereas in DaVinci Resolve and Fusion, the background node has different types that you can pick, and it can be a solid color or it can be a gradient. So that's what I've done here. And now how do I get that background node underneath the render pass? Well, to do that, I use a merge node. So merge nodes are probably one of the most frequently used nodes that you're going to use in these node tree networks. And most nodes you can think of as as an instruction. This is an analogy I'm borrowing from the YouTuber Casey Ferris. He's got a lot of great tutorials for Fusion. And the way he described it was, think about a node network as a set of instructions, and each node in that network is one bullet point in that list of instructions. Now, most nodes will only give one instruction, but there are a few exceptions, and the merge node is one of those exceptions, because the merge node is saying, put this on top of that in this way. In this way being the operator, so the blending modes. So we can make it a multiply, an overlay, that sort of stuff, right? In this case, we're just going to leave it as normal because that's all we needed to do. But there's one more thing we need to be aware of here, which you probably have already started to notice, which is the colors, these little triangles where we make these connections between nodes. Now, those do mean something. The way I've ordered the nodes, or sort of like arranged them out here, doesn't actually matter in the end. It might be a little bit easier to arrange them vertically. A lot of the VFX and movie industry people I see, they kind of do this like cascading diagonal orientation where the beginning nodes start in the upper left and then the final output is the lower right. I think that's sort of like the industry expectation for how you set up your node trees. But if you're only using a few nodes, it doesn't matter that much. I like to set them up sort of horizontally to make the most use out of this space. So that doesn't matter a whole lot. However, the way in which these are connected does matter. And specifically, the color of these little triangles where nodes get connected tell me what kind of connection is being made. And the default connection most of the time is going to be a yellow connection, which means the primary or the background. So in this case, the background node, that solid with the gradient on it, I want that to be shown behind the tumor. So that is getting the yellow connection. The tumor, I want that to be seen on top of that background. And so that is going into the green connection. Now I have on the merge node another little triangle, which you also see on the other nodes, which is blue. And blue is for masks or alphas. We'll get into that a bit more in just a second. But first, I just want to point out one last thing, which is sometimes we have a connection that does not do what we want, which is we've connected the tumor and the background into a merge node, and we're not seeing that tumor. Why is that? Well, it's because those connections are not in the right order. The background in this case is green, and so that means it's being laid on top of the tumor. So whenever you have two nodes connected with a merge and they're not giving you what you expect, a really helpful shortcut is Control-T on PC or Command-T on Mac, and that will swap those connections. So in this case, I've swapped them back. Now we have the tumor on top with the green connection. We have the background coming into that yellow connection for the background or the secondary connection. They're being connected with that merge node, and they're being piped out to the MediaOut node. And the MediaOut is what we see on the timeline. That is the sort of end result of our node compositing, is what we see back here on the edit page on the timeline. So that's what we've got. Just like in After Effects, we had the vena cava sitting on a layer on top of the tumor. And so here in DaVinci Resolve, we've got another track. Now, if you're in a timeline and a DaVinci Resolve timeline, and if we were starting from scratch, sorry, I should also have shown that. In here, in our master folder of assets, if we wanted to create a new timeline, we would right-click in this space, go Timeline, Create New Timeline. I've already got one set up, which is this one right here, the cable sarcoma tracks. So once we're in that timeline down here, we can add a new track. Similar idea, right-click. Oops. Sorry, I guess you've got to hover over the tracks listed on the left-hand side and then right click, and then you can do add track. So that's how we could like sort of mimic layers by adding more tracks. So the next track up here, which is the Vena Cava. Now, because the topmost track is still disabled, but the middle track is enabled, when I go into the Fusion page, now I'm going to see the nodes associated with this one. And now I'd also like to just share a quick keyboard shortcut for jumping through some of these pages. I mentioned at the beginning, if I hit Shift-1, that's going to bring up the project manager. I can also do Shift-2 to go to the media page, Shift-3 for the cut page, Shift-4 for the edit page, Shift-5 will take us into Fusion. So Shift and numbers 1 through, I think it's like 8, will help us navigate through the different workspaces of DaVinci Resolve. So Shift-5 to get into Fusion, and now we're looking at that Vena Cava. And thank God we've only got 3 nodes, right? So it's not too complicated. It's not too crazy here. In here, all we're doing is applying a mask to that Vena Cava. And as I think I had mentioned before, the blue connection on, I think most nodes, when you drop a new node into the workspace, you're going to have a blue triangle on it, and that's going to be an invitation to bring in a mask or an alpha or a matte. And so in this case, what I've done is I've drawn this polygon matte. And just a little navigation tip for you guys, whether you're in the node space or in the viewport, if you press and hold Control and use your mouse scroll wheel, that will zoom in and out. I believe on Mac it would be press and hold Command and scroll. And here we've added a mask. Another thing to point out, in the middle of the Fusion page, we've got all these icons across the middle. And these are sort of like the commonly used functions or nodes of Fusion. And so right here, we've got rectangle, ellipse, polygon, B-spline. These are your masking nodes. So if I grab new polygon node, if I click that button right now, it's going to add a mask to this mask because I've got this guy highlighted. But if I click off of it and I don't have anything highlighted, click that polygon node, it drops a new polygon. So I could start drawing a mask from scratch if I wanted to. In this instance, I'm just going to stick with the one that I already drew. And I do apologize. I would like to have shown some of these things live, but sometimes my computer just overheats and so it'll crash. So that's partly why I kind of like pre-built a lot of this stuff. But let's circle back into the masking, and I'll sort of explain like how this works and what I was doing. So similar to After Effects, I went in here and I drew out my polygon my spline for my mask, and then I had to animate that, right? Because at the very beginning we're zoomed out, and then over the course of the timeline we zoom in, and then once we've zoomed in, the camera kind of pans up. So in order to get that mask to animate along with what I'm seeing, I've got to add some keyframes. Now, keyframes can be a little bit tricky in Fusion if you haven't worked with these before, but I'm going to try and walk you guys through it and get you over some of the humps that I had to get over. So with this polygon mask node added to my piece of media, the media here, I'll preview this again by pressing 1, and then I'll pop this guy up in the screen here. Oh, and look, that it automatically applies the mask. I would have liked to have been able to preview that without the mask, but hey, I guess that's what I got. Oh, I guess it's because it's just like down the chain. So whatever it's previewing is automatically applying whatever came before it. But this piece of media for the Vena Cava, it's got a mask on it, and the mask, I need to add some keyframes to it. So I'm going to start that off with like whichever frame I started drawing this. Usually if I have something zoomed out like this, I know that as that animates, I'm gonna want more control points. If I started drawing that mask on it when it was zoomed way out, I probably wouldn't put as many points on it as I'm going to need. So I always kind of find where I'm zoomed in the most on an object, and that's where I'll start drawing my points, because I find it always easier to like shrink that, scale that down, than to have to add points to the mask later, and then you have to redo all your keyframes, right? So I'm going to start at the end here. Or no, here I started at frame 30 because I knew that this camera was going to pan down, and that might mean that the bottom of the mask gets clipped off. So I'm like, okay, let me start right in the middle where I know I've got a good view of this. And if I wanted to add a new keyframe here, I would go into my inspector panel. This is all the attributes for the node, and I've got it highlighted. My polygon node is highlighted, so this is all my controls for that. I'm going to go down to right click here for shape animation, right click, and then I'm setting a key. So I set the keyframe, and then my little diamond icon will turn red. It looks red to me. I've heard in like several tutorials people say this looks orange. I don't know. That's crazy talk to me. That looks red to me. But anyway, so that's how I know there's a keyframe. But as I mentioned, I had done some easy easing with the camera, right? In Cinema 4D. So when the camera zooms in on the Cava and then it pauses, and then before it shifts, I held it, right? So I want those keyframes to do that as well. And you'll probably think, okay, well, I'll go in the keyframes. This is actually not where you want to edit the keyframes. I know this is so counterintuitive and weird. What I'm doing is, by the way, is I went into the keyframe window, I pressed and held control and used the scroll wheel to zoom in on these layers. And these are supposed to like help me see the overall animation. They give me like the general animation curve, and they have these single pixel wide lines for keyframes. I was like, are you guys serious? Do you expect me to manipulate keyframes with this little tiny thing? Thankfully, no. It's just unfortunately named. The keyframes window is just sort of meant to give you an overview of all the keyframes associated with a node. And if you click and drag on this, you can move the whole thing all at once. And that's all it's meant to do. But if we actually want to change the nature of those keyframes, we're not going into the keyframes menu, we're going into the spline menu. So if you go into the spline menu and we highlight the node that we want to see the keyframes for, click this on here with the checkbox. Now we can see those keyframes. We can grab and click and drag and grab them, highlight them and grab them. And now we can do our easy easing. So if this had originally been looking like this, now I can go in here, I can grab these handles. And if I want to get a nice smooth easy ease, I'm going to do Shift F for flatten. You can also just do Shift S, which will add, if you don't have handles, it will add the handles for you onto that keyframe, and it will try to smooth them out. So Shift S to smooth, Shift F for flat. There's also another handy control when you're inside of this little spline window. If we do Control T, we get these extra menus that pop up for our easing, which give us, if we click in there and drag, we can actually change the how many frames this this easing will take place over. So that's kind of cool. So that gives us like precise control over our easing. So that's setting up the animation for the mask. I'm going to close out the spline window. And one other thing, if you guys are finding this workspace a little bit cramped, there's a few things you can do to sort of open up some more space for yourself here. If you hit V, will toggle this little viewer on and off when you've got like a ton of nodes. And this is like a huge node tree. It's kind of helpful to see all of those nodes as like a bird's eye view. So that's what this little viewport is for. But you can turn that off with V. We don't have a whole lot going on here, so we don't necessarily need that. We can also go up into Workspace and we can turn off page navigation, and that's going to turn off those little icons at the bottom. That's if we've like memorized the shift, 4 to take us to the edit page, shift 7 to take us to like, the audio page, shift. So if you want to do that, you can, to open up some more space. I like to have that page navigation on so that I know where I'm going. But anyway, let's proceed with the final layer here. So I'm going to go up to this next track, number 3. I'm going to enable that one, and then this is for the liver. We'll go back into Fusion, and it's the same idea. So I've got a polygon node for that mask. I had drawn that probably right here at frame 15, where I could see all of it. I would have set a key, go back to frame 0, reshape it by clicking on these points. Oops. And then moving them around, changing the handles, and then go to different points in the timeline and do the same. And that's sort of the same workflow. So that's how I've set up my masks for each of those tracks. And now that we've got them all layered up, we've got our animation, and it works much the same as in After Effects. The way that we've built this thus far is, like I say, sort of mimicking the way that After Effects works, but we can do this more efficiently because, as you notice, like we have all those nodes for those pieces of media, and then we're combining them with masks and we're merging them. Why not just merge all the media all in one node tree? Well, that's exactly what we should do. We should try to combine as many nodes into one node space as we can. This is going to be more efficient, and it's going to allow us to not have to jump in and out of spaces. So that's one of the advantages of working with a node-based workflow for compositing as opposed to layers, is with the layers and pre-comps, you constantly have to go into and out of these spaces. With nodes, you have everything all in one environment. So you can visually see everything that's affecting everything else. And that's what we're going to get into next now. So what I can do in the first example, in this timeline, I've got a Fusion clip. If you get more into compositing where you're using bits of footage or you're using like a still frame image, you might drop these on the timeline and want to start applying effects to them. As soon as you've applied some Fusion nodes to a clip, it's going to have this little icon in the lower right, these little 3 stars, and that's how you know there's some Fusion action happening. Like there's some Fusion nodes applied to this. That's what it's telling. So we've got this node here. We're going to jump over to Fusion again. I'm going to use Shift 5. And now we've got all of those shots brought together. I know this looks like quite a bit more complicated than what we were doing before, but it's actually not all that different. We start at the very beginning. I'm going to grab this MediaIn node for the tumor, which I renamed. I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard, and we see sort of a similar looking tumor to before, except the colors are like way off. Like, what the heck's going on? Okay, well, what happened here was I rendered this out using, I think it was linear Colorspace. If you're getting into more 3D animation stuff these days, you might have heard about ACES. ACES is to RGB what like RGB was to CMYK. So if you're familiar with doing stuff with print and you know all about having to convert your color spaces so that the printer ink will be appropriately representing those colors, you know that you lose a lot of information when you convert from RGB to CMYK. Now that's, I think, a pretty good analogy for what it's like when you move over into ACES. ACES color space is essentially just a lot more options of colors. It's a much larger gamut of colors. So a lot of major motion picture studios, like they all work in ACES, but a lot of their exported content, it has to be shown on monitors that most likely do not support that massive amount of like color information. So they have to convert it back down into RGB. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So I've got the tumor. And this one is also has a transparent background. It doesn't need a mask, so it's fine just as it is. Now you'll notice this is being merged a little bit later. First, I'm merging the liver and the cava. That's the first connection I'm making. And then I'm making another merge with the tumor. But let's back up and let's look at that cava and that liver being masked. Now, believe it or not, these are the same mask nodes, these polygon masks. These are the exact same nodes as what I just showed you in those PNG sequences. So I just literally copy pasted those nodes into this space. And then in my media pool, I went to these EXRs. I grabbed the EXR for the cava, and for the full anatomy, I brought these guys in here as a media node. And then I just applied these masks to these nodes. And so that's where we're getting the liver with this mask applied to it. And then that is being merged. Again, the liver connecting to the green triangle of this first merge node. So that way I know that's on top. And then the cava, that has the mask that I built for the cava, is being plugged into the blue connection on the cava node. And then the cava is going through the yellow connection on the first merge. And so that's how those two things are being combined in the first merge. And then that is getting piped into the second merge node. And in the second merge node, that's being placed on top of the tumor. And so in my viewer up here, I've hit number 2 by highlighting this node. And so up here, we're having a look at the comp with all 3 of those elements together. So we've got our transparency, we've got our transparent background. Now we just need to fix that color space. And so to do that, we're going to add a gamut node. And so the gamut is basically just saying convert one color space to another. And in this example, I'm going to leave it as no change. And if you have that option selected, rather than like telling it specifically which color space you've been rendering with, it's going to take its best guess. And in this case, that works for us. So I'm saying change this color space, which I think it was just linear sRGB, and convert it to simplified sRGB. So that's the output. So that's going to give us the colors we want to see. Now there is also another checkbox I want to mention here, which can come up. It came up for me on this gamut node when I first did this, like it was not looking right. But what you want to do is keep an eye out for this pre-divide, post-multiply checkbox. If you ever see that, more often than not, you do want that on. Usually, if that's not on, you'll have really weird like if you have transparency or feathering or color corrections, sometimes things just like won't look right. And that's the result of this checkbox not being on. I don't know why it's just not on by default. In most instances, I think it should be, but just a little tip about working in Fusion. All right, and so now we've got this color corrected, and now we pipe it into a new merge node. And this merge node has our gradient background. So that's sitting on top of that. And we finished our comp. So now we took all 3 of those tracks or layers, and we've combined them all into one workspace, which is much more efficient and easier to manage. And the way in which these are laid out, I can visually see and read what each of these nodes are and what they're doing. And so I know from a bird's eye view like what's happening here. And if I need to make a change, I can quickly navigate to that part of the pipeline and make the change there. So this is kind of the end goal, or the benefits of working with Fusion and working with nodes, is we can composite our takes and shots and bring a lot of things together into the same working space, not have to navigate around through the software to make adjustments. And so there we go. Next step I want to take is start looking at some render passes. I don't want to get like too heavy into the node compositing because I've actually heard from some people that they are kind of trying these days to just get like the best possible beauty render out of their 3D software, and they don't necessarily go into like all the ambient occlusion and reflection pass and depth pass and all that stuff. So I totally get that. So I won't like spend too much time here, but I just wanted to show you guys like basically how that kind of all works. So the idea here is that, again, like the same way that we had 3 tracks, which sort of represent those 3 layers of our shot. It's like the 3 elements of it. We would do the same thing here. In this node tree, you'll see I've got 3 node groups. And so each of these node groups is representing each of those elements. So this one would be the tumor, I think. Yep. And then the cava, and then the liver, or the anatomy on top. But when I open up each one of these, it starts to look a little hairy. It starts to look like we've got kind of like a lot of complexity here. But I promise you, it's not that crazy. Basically, each one of these nodes, node groups, is pretty much what I showed you in the last node tree. We've got our alpha pass, and then that's being applied to our render, and then do our color correction, and then that's being merged with the background. So that's the first node group. Second node group, I've got the cava, which has a mask on it, color corrected. Then we have the alpha channel, and then that's applied to the merge. Now, before I finish this off and go over and kind of repeat myself yet again, I'm just going to note that the MediaIn nodes this time actually are not a MediaIn node. What I can do is, rather than click and drag this EXR or PNG or JPEG render sequence, rather than pull it in from the media pool, I can import it directly. And the way that I do that, and I would have to import it into the Fusion Workspace using this method if I want access to the render passes. So the way I do that is in the render workspace here. You ever want to bring up like a node or search for a node, if you do control spacebar, you get this little search menu. And what I want is a loader node. So anything I want to search for in here, I can find that, merge node, find color corrections. Yeah, this control spacebar little menu is really, really handy. But right now, what I want is a loader node. The loader node is going to help me go find a shot somewhere, and I'm going to navigate on my computer to where I have a render sequence saved. I'm going to select that and hit open. And now I have a node with the name of that render pass in the node, as opposed to MediaIn. And this is important because this is reading that information a little bit differently. And I put in the notes, I apologize that this is sort of like a convoluted extra step to have to do, but it's just sort of like the way that Fusion is built. Fusion, one of the cool things about it is the community and the network of people who have built all these really cool plugins for it. After Effects sort of has, a good number of people like building plugins, but a lot of those plugins like you have to pay for, whereas like with Fusion, most of the plugins are built in this open source kind of mindset and community. And so most of them, like the good ones, they're all free, which is amazing. But there is a script that I'm going to use here, which is the HOS Split EXR Ultra plugin. And I have a separate tutorial where I'll show you how to like go find that and install that. I've got this render pass loaded into my Fusion Workspace. Now I'm going to go to script. I'm going to run this script for the EXR, and I'm going to set my options here, hit run, and then it pulls out all of the render passes associated with that file. And I went like way overboard and rendered probably more render passes than I needed, just to kind of like make the point and show you, and also, give us all these like different options of things to play with, right? So you can go through like each of these nodes. Oops, some of these are not loading. But at any rate, oh, that's right, because it was the tumor. It didn't have like a whole lot going on. But at any rate, that's where I would get all my nodes. And like when I build these shots where I'm starting to like layer up stuff and build different takes, I like to just load them all in, just as I had shown, and then just like pull out all the layers. And then I go through these and I like pull out things one at a time as I need them. And in this case, I really only used the ambient occlusion. I just decided to like add that as like an extra little emphasis to sort of like show a plane change or change in transparency between the liver and the cava. So that way, as this animated, and we reached the point where I want to bring in that label, it's like super clear that like there's like something behind this liver still, right? But yeah, so that's the long and short of how we get our access to our render passes and how we can start doing render pass compositing. If I wanted to start doing more stuff like bringing in the reflection pass and adding that, or screening that or something, I could add another merge node. So with this merge node selected, do control space bar, the merge. Then when I have a node selected and I add a new node, it just automatically adds it right after it. And then I could grab like, the reflection pass. So let's see, what was that? That was the anatomy. Yep, let's go down here. Let's find a material reflection. Is that the right one? Yeah, you can kind of see it. It's a little bit of like a rim light. Bring that in here. Then, whoops. Yeah, now, and so this is a great little example of where like things don't work as like the way you'd like them to. With groups, and the way you group a bunch of nodes together is you grab some nodes and you hit Control G, and that will make this node group. When they're grouped like this, it's nice because you can like close the group and then it condenses them down. But what's annoying is you can't like click and drag things in and out of them, but you can copy paste things in and out. So that's what I'll do here. So Control X, go into the group, Control V, paste it. Okay, sweet, there it is. All right, so now this guy, this reflection pass, I'll add into this node, and then this I'll set to screen, and then bam. So we've now we got a little extra. I mean, it's barely discernible, but a little extra rim light on there. But anyway, that's how you do render pass compositing, by adding in extra layers with those passes. Okay, so now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the other elements we'd like to add. In this case, let's go right over into text. Let's talk about adding in some text. So the label is kind of like how we're explaining to people what's the important thing that they should be paying attention to in this shot. And what I did was I grabbed one of the really good presets in DaVinci Resolve. They've got a ton of like free presets. And in particular, they have this really great preset called a call out, which is a label with a leader line on it. So I just pulled that out. I edited some of its effects. And I'm not going to get too much into that because I actually have a completely separate tutorial that explains all of like how I did that. That's on TVASurg. I'll share the link for that. So that's already built. And any of these presets, if I've got that highlighted and I go into Fusion, I can see that it's just a bunch of nodes. Like it's just a preset of nodes, and there's no rule that says you can't like mess with this. You can't like mess around in here. Of course you can. So you can go in here, and if you kind of like know what to look for and you know what you're messing around with, like right here, I knew that, oh, it's a text node. Okay, so I've got all my text controls in the inspector. I just have to find that text node that's a part of this plugin or template, and I can customize the look of it. So that's what I did. And then, as you're probably also sort of wondering, is like, well, wait a minute, why do we have these nodes in like a separate node space? It's like everything else. Why not just copy these guys out, go into the shot itself, and then just paste those guys in there? So yeah, we can totally do that. And so that's what I've got in the last shot here. And then I started to even get a little crazy with adding like an outline on it just for funsies. yeah, the last thing I'll just point out here is in order for this, oops, sorry, I went to the wrong spot. In order for this label to work, I have to hold a freeze frame. And in order to hold a freeze frame, I have to add another node into our network. So I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. So what I'm going to do is I've got those 3 node groups for the 3 elements of my shot. Got the tumor, the cava, and then the anatomy. And then I find the place on the timeline where I want that to hold still. So I think this animation went over like 60 frames. Yep, it did. So what I'll do is I'll add this time stretcher node, which again, like, I'm not sure why they named it that. Why don't you just name it the freeze frame node or something, right? I don't know, man. Anyway, that's what they called it. And so that's what we need. So we need a time stretcher node, and we want to add this at the very end of our chain. But this call out for the label, that has animation itself, right? And I don't want to freeze frame the animation on the label. I only want to freeze frame the animation on the render pass. So I'm going to put the time stretcher node after my rendered shots, all those nodes for that. And then with that time stretcher selected, now I'll go Shift Command, I'll add a merge, and I'll add the call out. I've also added a little drop shadow to it. And I'll connect this again to the green connection of the merge node to put it on top of this guy. And oh geez, the scale is okay. So that's okay. This reminds me of what I should have mentioned earlier, but I did want to bring this up at some point, which is whenever you're building up these node trees, at some point, somewhere back in all of your nodes, there's going to be a node that's like the very first node of that tree. And wherever, sometimes as you get like more complicated node trees, it gets harder to like find where that node was. But that node, the very first node of like the whole tree, sets the resolution for the whole rest of the node tree. So a lot of times what people will do is they'll start a node tree with just a blank background node, and they won't even make it like a gradient or a solid. They'll just take this background node, this very first node, make it a solid color, and they'll just set the alpha to 0. And they'll just have a completely blank, transparent, flat node as the very first node, just so they can go into this image part and set the resolution for the whole node tree. So that is sort of like a recommended best practice for building up node trees. Just start off with a background node, and just merge everything on top of that as you go. And that first background node sets your resolution. So in this instance, I think what ends up happening is that this call out is actually at 1920 by 1080. And then all my renders are 1280 by 720. Dang, that's going to kind of mess me up if I have to scale up my render passes to match this. So what I'll do instead is I'll go Control Spacebar. I'll grab a transform node, and I'll just scale down the label. It's not the end of the world. So that's what I ended up doing to just kind of solve that in this instance. But I did want to point that out, that scaling issue, that sometimes that crops up, and the way you kind of just sort of preemptively prepare for that is, you set up a background node in the beginning. So that's playing around with nodes, adding freeze frames, adding labels, text elements, kind of cover the main content. Eventually, you can accomplish just about everything that you would do in After Effects. You can do it in Fusion. So I wanted to put together like this little example just to show you that is the case. So I had this little graphic that I made, and I did this fun little animation on it. And what I wanted to accomplish, there's like 2 things I wanted to do. I wanted to show the 2D effects, and I also wanted to make sure that we can import vector illustrations into Fusion, because I know that is a workflow that a lot of people do use. We definitely do that at TVASurg quite a bit. We'll draw, we'll build 2D assets in Illustrator, and then we'll pop those in storyboards for the earlier part of production, and then we import those into After Effects to animate them later. So I wanted to show how I did that. So what I did here was first of all, in order to, oh, wait, that's right. I wanted to show in this comp, this is kind of like what you're going to get when you first import vectors into Fusion. It's going to look cray cray. The file format you have to use is SVG. That's the format that Fusion understands. And there are some like weird aspects of working with vectors. Fusion has its own kind of like vector world. It's called like the shape system. So like if you are searching through nodes and you have anything with an S at the beginning, like S ellipse, that's going to be like a shape ellipse. So that's Fusion's like own thing. And you can convert nodes into shape nodes, but it's a little complicated. But essentially, you can do vectors, bringing them into Fusion using SVG. There's one checkbox that you have to be very careful about, which is the preserving Illustrator capabilities. Do not keep that on. You have to turn that off, because if you have that checkbox on, Fusion will not understand the file. It just won't read it. So you have to turn that off, but then your SVG should import okay. And it's going to import like this. This is what it's going to look like. You're going to have the name of that file, and then it's going to have all those vectors being brought in as masks, and then those masks are being applied to background nodes. So the color of each of these elements here, like these are each being set by those background nodes, and then they're being merged one right after the other. Okay, so that presents us with a couple challenges here. The first thing I notice is like, okay, wait a minute. If I want to animate the points on my splines, that's not going to work, because I'm going to have to do the work twice every time, right? Like I'm going to have to work with the control points for, or the anchor points for the fill and the stroke. Like what the heck, man? That's no, I'm not having that. So that was sort of like the big hurdle I had to get over. And then I did notice too, like some of these like vectors, like they just did not look good. But luckily, as the more I played with it, the more I realized like, okay, well, that was kind of like a random thing that sort of happened. Luckily, it wasn't that big of a deal. And also, as long as you got the spline for the fill, that's all you need. You didn't need to have a separate spline for the stroke. And like why would you expand, or what is it? Yeah, expand the path, and so that you have like two splines for like just one, like you wouldn't do that, right? So I think like when you import it, sometimes it does that, but you don't need those. So essentially what I'm saying is half of these nodes, you don't need them. All we need are the fills. So let's go into the second Fusion comp. And here I've done a little bit more organization. And what I'm doing here is I'm using, instead of groups, I'm using underlays. And so like, let's say I had some nodes, just copy paste these out here. If I wanted to like put these together, if I do Control G, that puts them into a group, and then I can open and close it. That's cool. But as I was showing earlier, I can't like easily drag things in and out. So that's like a pain. Instead, what I can do, so I do an underlay. An underlay will group them so that I can click and drag them all together as one unit. I can't condense them anymore, but you know, I can deal without that. What's nice though about the underlay is like I can set the color, you know, give it a different color. I can name it, and then I can also drag individual nodes in and out of it with ease. So that's what I'm using here. Just delete that because I don't need it. So the first attempt, and what I'm showing here is the steps I took to get that effect where I've got just one spline that controls both the shape, or the stroke and the fill. Should be automatic. Why isn't it automatic? What the heck, Fusion? But here's how we make that happen. First, what I tried to do was I had the Keva for the fill. I played that to a background for that fill color. And then I had a separate background color. This one, oh no, sorry. This is me doing that thing where I set like a blank node with the dimensions, and that's what my final output. That's kind of what I'm doing here. This paint node, again, this is like weirdness that it's like a whole system. Like paint nodes kind of do their own thing. They're a little bit weird. But it's sort of like referencing this Cava, this spline here is referencing it. But it didn't quite give me the result I wanted. It created some problems. So I'm like, okay, I have to find a different way to do this. So I was like, well, I could copy paste, the same spline, and I could have two different things going on, but that doesn't give me what I want, because I want to be able to control the animation with just one spline. So the solution I found was to use an instance. And so what you can do is, if you have a spline for an element, and you apply that to a background node to give it whichever color of the background fill. If I take this and I do, I think it's Control C and then Control Shift V, Control C and Control Shift V. Now I have an instance node. And I know it's an instance because it's got this green line connecting it, and that green line is behind it. It's like being affected by the drop shadow and everything, man. It's like a special kind of connection here. So the instance node has these green outlines on all the parameters, and that's telling me that all these parameters are being driven by that original node. And so this is sort of the answer to our problem here. So this main spline for the gallbladder, it's being applied as a mask to a background for the fill, and then the instance of it is being I'm gonna take some of the attributes of it, and in this case what I did was I unchecked the solid box and I changed the border width. But if I do that off the bat, it's going to affect both nodes. Like if you make a change to an instance, it changes the original one, but I don't want that. I want the instance to have slightly different parameters. So if you go to one of those parameters and then you do right click, you go over the text, and then you do de-instance, then it will de-instance that parameter. And then that will be like a parameter specific to the instance that is independent of its source or parent node. And so now we can have one node that controls both the stroke and the fill. And then we merge those in series, and then add ourselves a background. And we've got our nodes. Yeah, and then the animation is like the same as what I was showing before, with right clicking on the shape animation. And then the same thing with like the spline editor, and grabbing these keyframes, making your adjustments there to customize the look and feel of it. And so yeah, that's a quick run through of how I set up the 2D animation. And I hope you guys have sort of gotten a sense of all the capabilities and things that Fusion can do. And I hope that you walk away from this talk agreeing with me that this is a legitimate alternative to After Effects. You can use this for all the compositing needs. Everything that you do with After Effects, you can do it here. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving me your time and attention. Appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed this. So.